our next panelist, or keynote, I actually had the pleasure of working for, and he has a very interesting story to tell here about, well, he's a Google Lunar X Prize competitor, and this wasn't his first team that he formed. So now to talk about international markets, please welcome Bob Richards to the floor. If you do not know about him, look him up. You can adjust the mic.
Or I could take that one, right?
Yep. And
Thank you.
slides work on there.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Hello, everyone. We'll try that one again. It's a real pleasure. You've heard that a lot, but I've been in this game, as many of you have, for a long, long time now. So it's nice to be, among friends, but to talk about big ideas, and to talk about how much, how far we've come, and particularly in the Space Frontier Foundation and these conferences in particular. It's just boggles my mind that looking at an audience this large that shows up at 7:30 or 8 in the morning. That didn't happen in the early days, and it's really a tribute, I think, to the organizers and the youth that the founders of the Space Frontier Foundation are bringing in, largely, I think, from SEDS and the IUSU crowd. So just as a metric, who here in the audience has touched ISU or SEDS or Space Generation or Singularity University in any way? So look around. So there's a thank you for that. It's not a bad posse to have in the audience. For those of you who perhaps don't know me, my life really has been dedicated to building institutions, companies, and programs that will help humanity become a multi-planet species. I think that's really been the primary motivation when I look back to the things that I've done, some crazier than others. But it was the early days in 1980s as a student that I met these two brilliant people, Peter Diamandis and Todd Hawley, and many others. Jim Muncie, this is when we all got together, and Rick and Bob, and we all started as youth thinking about what we can do to change the world. Having been an orphan of Apollo and so sadly disappointed that the vision of the future that we really thought we had growing up just wasn't there when we started to graduate from college and university. So it became a lifelong ambition to meet the people that we needed to meet to change the world and change the future and create the future that we all knew that could exist. It was an exercise not just in some of the myopic arguments we get into when we're burdened with, let's say, national arguments, but it's the international argument that we found to be the most important one. How to operate on the international stage, how to deal with cultures, decision processes, and even the approach to problems that are so different from country to country, culture to culture. And to get these people together around the planet who really do have this common passion as a species and share this exploration gene that is manifest in many of us more than others. That we really do need to be part of the species that gets us off the planet. So in practical terms, it's been about creating not just the institutions that gather the people like ISU or SEDS or Space Generation, SU now, to get them to meet, but actually it's the big ideas that attract the people together and get the conversation going. But I found it's more so about the bite-sized practical measures that you can communicate to the individual to actually do something about it. And that's where I've been so privileged to be involved with this foundation that gives awards for actually getting something done, not just talking about it. So in my presentation about the international markets that Gary has asked me to address, I guess that's the main theme, is the big ideas combined with the practical, bite-sized, practical things, I said that twice, practical squared, to actually get things done. So, NewSpace approach to international markets. When Gary asked me to talk about this, I was thinking, geez, how do I differentiate a generalist discussion from what I'm actually doing every day? And I really can't. So let me give you a bit of an insight into kind of what I'm thinking and what I'm trying to do these days that I will try to generalize in a way that is of value to you, but maybe we can get into a bit of a Q&A that would help. So thinking about the bigger picture, thinking about the big ideas that I think really excite people that translate into markets for you, for your nonprofit or for your profit. It's talking about where people want to be, where they, especially the young people of today, where do you want to be in 40 years? You know, at the penultimate midlife crisis that you will ultimately experience, Mr. Young person like us, do you see the planet as, you know, transfixed into this planetary paralysis, where we're just dealing with a two-dimensional thought process trapped on a sphere, or have we actually broken out into more of the Anelian thoughts of perhaps not a multi-planet species at this point, but maybe just at least a permanence in space that makes sense? Or are we talking about a multi-planet species like we are all trying to get to, where we do have presence on Mars and maybe some other worlds? Maybe we've actually can get to the other parts of the solar system, which you know, have secrets yet to be discovered. But maybe, you know, just maybe, and our friend Arthur Clarke, you know, was fond of talking about, it's really dangerous to try to predict the short-term future. It's far more dangerous to try to predict the long-term future, because you tend to underestimate, you know, the long-term future. Think back, those of you who can, to 1985, you know, or think of the world we live in today and how we just couldn't have done, you know, couldn't have imagined. So there may be a world out there not that long from now where we are actually this member of this cosmic society, where we do discover we're not alone in the universe. Is this a future, and how do we engage the thought processes, the networking, and the products we need to create the markets internationally to do this? Well, I think there's an obvious answer, and this has, you know, been a age-old discussion. We have in front of us a very unique opportunity. We have a two-world system that is quite unique in the universe, we're finding. It's very odd to have a moon so large compared to its mother planet. It's part of really a planetary archipelago, as I refer to it, and we have, if we were the Polynesians and we're looking out across the ocean, we saw the island on the horizon, that would give us this destination that would allow us to start talking about what do we need to do to get there, and what do we do when we're there, and how do we stay. Technologies erupt, policies erupt, discussions erupt. And so the moon we're very, very lucky to have. It's something that excites me, and it has been for a long, long time now. But I did start as a Mars person, and I still am. I had the great privilege of being taught and then become a special assistant to Carl Sagan when Carl was doing some of his best work on planetary science still. And it was Carl that infected me with the vision of Mars. I was actually lucky enough to be on a Mars mission, not me personally, but an instrument that my company had created in Canada flew on the Phoenix Mars lander and landed on the North Pole of Mars, and the Canadians discovered falling snow. How appropriate was that? And, you know, and I don't want to say been there, done that, like Obama did to the moon, but to me it really, and like Mars is definitely a destination for us. And I think it has a universal appeal internationally to talk about a destination like that. So Mars is very effective when you're talking about how do you excite, particularly young people wanting to go into careers and go into business. And of course, it's exciting a lot of people down at SpaceX, because that is where they want to go, and everybody knows that. There's another reason to get people, you know, it's not just the vision and the excitement, but there's also the fear factor. I mean, that's one of the big motivators of humanity. You know, someday there's going to be a really bad day for humanity. You know, these big rocks that fly through space, and a couple of them just missed us. They are very effective biological cleansers. You just have to ask any dinosaur. And it's this, this is a reality, of course, that we all understand and live with, but 98% of the population doesn't get it. You know, every year there's a mass demonstration in Canada about global warming, and it's really the media that influences the public opinion about all this, right? We really know where the problems are, and the opportunities. Every problem is an opportunity. So when we're talking about how we turn this excitement about going into space and becoming a multi-planet species, combined with the practical necessity of guarding against the really bad days that have a low probability of coming, but one day they will come, it's a very, very low probability that humanity will be wiped out next Tuesday, but it could happen. We've got to work against that. So what's the right way to do that? And as we're talking about how you take the new space frontier to international markets, There's this dichotomy out there that I think is in the psyche of most human beings that can touch a phone or touch a TV, which is most of the population these days. People understand what happened, back in ancient history to most people alive today. That there's a huge government incentive to get to the moon, and it was abandoned, of course, as we know, more quickly than we actually had achieved it. And then there's this newer dichotomy, right, where we have the NewSpace companies, spurred on by the enthusiasm that comes out of many people in this crowd. And there's this dichotomy that really fuels a lot of the arguments and the passionate discussions that are going on today. Iconically, we did this. But how do we do it again in a sustainable way? And how do we do it again with markets and international new space approaches to other cultures and other people who don't perhaps get it, and they haven't grown up in an environment where they've even been given the seed of the idea that they can participate in a way that's personal? I think this is an iconic photograph of today. This is a new space pioneer, one of our heroes, of course, of new space, walking in line with President Obama, with the NASA administrator following. And I think that's, you're going to see more and more of that. And that's not intended to be a slight on NASA. Of course, we all know that. But I think it's a very important icon, particularly for the international participants in space, to understand that there's a transition that's taking place. There's also some wild kids on the block that are coming up with new ideas. The Google Lunar X Prize is one of those that I'll talk about in a second. But I think this is the big idea, or one of the big ideas we can use to help unify the thinking internationally so we can have a common discussion. One of the problems we have with the International Space University and at SU, Singularity University, is that the conclusions will always be out of alignment if the assumptions don't match. And when you're talking to people from other cultures and other countries, the fundamental assumptions about how to approach things is sometimes out of alignment. So it's really, really important to get the assumptions down. So one of the things that I think we should talk about more is the expansion of Earth's economic sphere. We see a pattern, if you look, and this is a very rough slide to convey the idea, but you can see that the economic sphere, defined by, for most of our history as a species, as trapped with two legs on the Earth, expanded with aviation and technology, which ultimately became privatized, and then became a global phenomena with really the effort of many individuals who tried to win the Orteig Prize, and ultimately the underdog Charles Lindbergh, who did. But iconically, that one individual became the impetus for a whole new industry that erupted. And as Clayton was talking about, a lot of the commercial activity right now, of course, is in geosynchronous orbit, where all of those revenues flow through space. And much of the capital is here with our revolution of personal space flight and new space. That's where a lot of the capital is focused, and that's where it should be focused, to get the access to space down. Other countries are looking at this with curiosity, with skepticism, and I don't think you will find in any other place on the planet, other than the United States right now, the type of capability, resources, and the convinced minds that are allowing this to happen. So what I'm very interested in, I'm really happy that, and of course George Whiteside's talked to us this morning, and that was phenomenal. What I'm looking at is what's the next phase, right? What's the next order of magnitude to point to that big discussion and that big talk? And I think that is something that really gets people excited. It's the next order of the economy, is to move it out to the moon and beyond, and to have those discussions. So when I find myself talking to these international markets, and these people, the moon is a common uniting phenomena, right? Everybody sees it, whether you're born into poverty or born into wealth. No matter where you come from, the moon is a common denominator. And Rick Tumlinson and I have a very fond story that sometimes he tells over social events, where we had the opportunity to talk to some kids in Sri Lanka about the moon, and they knew nothing about it. And in that a few moments of discussion, we actually had elevated their understanding. There he is, elevated their understanding. And we saw the lights come on in their eyes when what was just a light in the sky became a world. became a world. And I bet that those kids were completely transformed, became different type of people because of that realization we're able to give them in that very early stage. So there are these opportunities. I'm talking a lot about the younger generation because I guess it dates back to the NewSpace 2 conference, when I was like 5 years old and talking to Arthur Clarke, and Peter and Todd were there, and a lot of us were there. And Arthur said, we said, what is your advice? How do we actually get this world changed? How do we get people to get it? And he said, concentrate on the young people. Forget about Joe Sixpack and the older generation. They're going to be gone by the time you actually get to. So we spent a lot of time, and I spent a lot of time talking about the young people. So engaging them in the opportunity that convinces them that they can play a role personally is a very important aspect of reaching out to these international markets. The moon isn't the only thing, of course, but I think it's a unifying symbol that really helps us talk about, get a conversation going. And we can talk about the way that we can bring resources back from the moon, and everybody understands that. They understand that we need energy, we need resources to have an affluent society so we can raise the standard of living of people all over the planet. People get that. We can talk about space-based manufacturing. Us in the engineering community can get excited about that, but it's really the space tourism entertainment that's really getting the focus right now, of course, because that's where a lot of the capital is coming. And that's fine, right? The people who do it first will excite everybody else that comes after them. We talked about mining the moon. We've talked about, it's really about technology too. So, this is a longer conversation. I'm a renegade Canadian. I am described, I think, in many of the Canadian blogs right now as Canadian-born because I think I'm accused of being a defector from Canada. I'm here for a reason. I'm here because in the United States here, and I'm here in Silicon Valley for a reason. And that's because this is where the people get it. And it's the people, people with backpacks have the resources, too, to do things that only countries could do. And it's this micro-miniaturization of technology. It's swords to plowshares. But more than anything else, in this country in particular, and in this area in particular, the scarce resource that I find nowhere else is the convinced mind. That something phenomenal is possible. And if you want to get to a young person anywhere on this planet and convince them that they can make a change, give them this type of insight, that they can make a change, and you'll see the magic happen. We have no place on the planet, well, Clayton talked about, of course, there are commercial launches everywhere on the planet. And they'll become more so available as the demand picks up. But it's micro-miniaturization, what we can do with CubeSats today and put technology and potential missions into the hands of universities and ultimately into individuals is how you get to those international markets. So by bringing NewSpace to the world, I'm talking about those practical bite-sized measures that you can do, talk about the big picture, we'll talk about the bite-sized things that are practical, that you can get traction with. CubeSats are one of the phenomenal ways we can excite people to actually perform missions in space. And we're using here with our Moon Express company a technology that was developed mostly in the United States in a delusional campaign to try to protect this country from inbound ICBMs. But the technology that was created under the DoD programs that was previously classified is now accessible by the commercial sector. And what this allows us to do is to create very capable spacecraft in my area, a lander system, that can perform feats of propulsion and exact pinpoint landing that just weren't possible before. Many of you now know that my company, Moon Express, and I see some other Google Lunar X Prize people here. Fred? Anybody else here from the Google Lunar X Prize? Thank you. Great, fantastic. So, this is a competition that really, when I was thinking about how do you excite international markets, X Prize is really doing it. And the Google Lunar X Prize in particular is really the first prize of a global magnitude that the X Prize has really, really tried. So the Ansari X Prize, was limited to U.S. teams. When Google got involved, they really wanted it to be an international prize. It's created enormous complications, and I think some of us have some insight into that. The conflict of laws, and it was this convergence of desire, but the pragmatic barriers to actually getting agreements in place that make sense for everybody in insurance matters. Tremendous, tremendous challenge. But it's here more locally with my company, Moon Express, we've been able to partner with NASA. in a way that I would really hope that other countries and space agencies take a look at. NASA is a very unique federal agency that's allowed to actually contract with private sector in an upside-down way that allows the private sector to pay NASA money to help with technical affairs. And we've been able to create a reimbursable Space Act agreement here at NASA Ames that helps us embrace technology that was developed by NASA and commercialize it in a way that becomes economical. Science is another way that broad markets can be excited. You know, science is the universal language. You know, it's the thing that brought me into it. I was, I became an astronomer and a scientist but I was really more interested in actually getting to a destination and doing something about it. But it's the scientific discussion I think is really, really important for international markets. Economics, you know, this is the bottom line, certainly around here. If you're in business as I am, to do good by doing well. The economics in these days, despite the meltdowns of the last few years, which made it very difficult to raise money for a moon mission and still does, but when you have companies like SpaceX actually doing it and discussions of IPOs, you know, on the horizon, initial public offerings, that create the valuation ladders that the rest of us can mimic, right? And we can flow behind, is an incredible change from anything that's happened before. So if you're talking about bringing NewSpace to the international community, it's the practical ways that Silicon Valley in particular is expert at building valuation of companies with milestone-based financing. When you have entrepreneurs willing to put up their own risk capital and having larger investments come in, if that model can be conveyed in a way that other international markets can happen, that's great. And as George described this morning, one of the biggest pulses of influx of cash into Virgin Galactic didn't come from the United States. You know, politics, we're going to be talking about that endlessly throughout, you know, the next 48 hours, of course. In my view, the time is actually right for us to create a clear, concise message. And there was a change, for me at least, in the last year, and one of the reasons I did come down to the United States was this clear change of at least described policy, verbalized policy, that the commercial sector was going to be very important going forward. Moon Express was born under a year ago. As Gary had mentioned, I've been working for several years on the first team that entered the Google Lunar X Prize called Odyssey Moon. But it's this competition that really is propelling us all forward, I think, in creating international markets that will benefit NewSpace in many, many ways. My founders, Naveen Jain and Barney Pell, Barney was here earlier in the conference, are just so enthusiastic about commercial space. Two more people that we're bringing into the fold of other backers of NewSpace. And you know, we really have a chance to excite, through their innovation and the many others backing many other companies, to really make an example for the world to follow. And I'm really happy that we're able to do it. I guess just one slide on the commercial for the company. We have a great team here. We're located at NASA Ames. We've got 15 people working here full-time, about another 10 or so that touch the payroll. We're just across the road, and our lander development is actually just across the road in Area 45, as we lovingly call it. And our team is working very hard this week, and I know everybody else is that's working in the Google Lunar X Prize. So thank you for Google to step up. You know, $30 million isn't enough to do it, but it's enough to catalyze it. And it's certainly, when you have a customer that's willing to step up and offer that money, even if it's COD, it really helps. And if this model of prizes and incentivized accomplishment can be replicated internationally, then I think the bringing NewSpace to other worlds, that's eventually, to other countries, and then to other worlds will be among us. I wanted to point out, before I end here, Steve Durst, who's sitting quietly in the back of the room there, who's, I think, been one of the most consistent believers in NewSpace for decades. And I've been privileged to work with Steve and help him get down the path of realizing his dream of creating an international lunar observatory, which will do observation and communication from the surface of the moon. And just last week, Steve, if I may, we went through a very critical milestone of demonstrating this prototype instrument with a number of science teams from around the world operating it from afar through the internet in a way that they will operate it on the moon. And so I wanted to give a nod to Steve for being a persistent and consistent voice for NewSpace. And I is the first word, in his company, International Lunar Observatory. So we're talking about bringing new space to international markets. Steve's really doing it, and hats off to you, Steve, for helping. So a number of project activities that we're undertaking. All of these are bite-sized, so we hope to approach new space markets universally. I'm running out of time, but I just wanted to give you the final slide. And I showed this once before, and a couple of you might have been at the SETI Institute a few weeks ago. And this is never, before that we didn't show this publicly. So we really hope to be able to create a technology and a system within a system with our lunar landers where we're able, as you see, this cute little robot here, we have these poppers that we're developing that are able to be delivered on a small lander that can then pop away. And each one of them, we can take 5, 10. Each one of them is a micro mission in itself. They're flying CubeSats with high-tech avionics and propulsion. And the things that can fly around on the moon can also fly through space. So these are things that we can put in the hands of students and universities and researchers in these bite-sized pragmatic ways and try to have people pragmatically use NewSpace techniques to excite young people to get involved in the space program. And so one day, hopefully not too soon, we'll be there to boldly stay. Thank you very much. Is there time?
We have time for a few questions.
We have time for a few questions. Do you want to, if there are, any questions?
Any questions?
Hi, Bob. Can you talk more about those little hopper guys and how they're going to work and how they're going to move around?
Boy, I got myself into trouble, didn't I? I guess from a high level, I can't go into much of the technology, proprietary stuff, all that. But, conceptually, just think about it. These are little, multi-kilogram things that have the intelligence of formerly large landing systems. And each one of them are programmable, can talk to each other. And depending on the type of propulsion you want to land, these things can go anywhere from, let's say, 500 meters, if you want to win the Google Lunar X Prize, to kilometers over the horizon. And each one of them can have multi-purposes. These things can not just go to the surface of the moon, but they can go elsewhere. So it really is the continuation of the micro-miniaturization of propulsion and avionics and electronics that I was talking about that allows us to do these tiny spacecraft. Their problem is it's really hard for them to get to the moon, but if you can find a system that delivers them there, or to an asteroid or other places, then we have these systems within systems to become pragmatic things that we can sell in bite-sized pieces that I was talked about. And each one of them can have a flag on it, or can have a university logo on it, or whatever happens, or a company's logo. That's what it's all about. Any more?
So we have one from the online forum.
Okay.
And this would be the last one.
Okay.
So what do you think is the potential for a lunar base or colony as a gateway for deep space travel?
What do I think is the
Potential.
potential? I think it's enormous. I think it's the way to go. Rick Tumlinson was kind enough to invite me to participate in a book that he edited called Return to the Moon. And that was a few years ago, Rick, at this point, 2008, I think it was. And it's still available on Amazon.com, Return to the Moon. Rick Tumlinson, editor. And I talked about a double base system, actually, on the moon, where I think the near side is really, really practical for commerce and for learning how to do stuff. But I think the real opportunity in the moon, if you want to talk about deep space missions and a moon as a leverage or a platform for learning how to do things on Mars or beyond, that the far side of the moon, the dark side if you like Pink Floyd, the far side of the moon has a real practical application for us because it's the only place that's within Earth distance that you have true and complete distance from humanity. You're visually and electromagnetically completely isolated on the far side of the moon. So you can have a colony there, and we have no idea what the psychological impacts are going to be with true isolation. So I think we need to try that. I don't, if you have kids, that want to go camping, you don't say, okay, go up into the wilderness, kids, and we'll see you in a week. You say, go in the backyard and pitch a tent and figure out how to do it. So I think we need to pitch a tent on the far side of the moon, figure out how to do it, where the cavalry or the parents are just over the horizon if something goes wrong, and we don't send our our people or our robots off to far destinations before we try that. So I think it is the leverage. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. Thanks, Gary.
And we will now have a short networking break.